Welcome to the Sip and Scale podcast, where we talk about everything business, entrepreneurship, and startups. My name is Blendi Muriqi. I'm the CEO and founder of Delegate.co. Each week, you'll join us as we talk with industry experts and business owners, sharing actionable insights to drive your business forward. So grab your favorite beverage and let's sip our way to success. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sip and Scale podcast. Today, we're excited to have Sam Dundas, the co-founder of Bestie AI. Thank you for coming on today, Sam. Bestie AI is an AI-powered tool that streamlines guest messaging and boosts revenue for short-term rental managers. His innovative approach and leadership have made a major impact in the industry. What I love about Sam is we both come from a hospitality background, and we've taken that background and applied it to new business models and ventures. And I'm excited to have him on today to talk about Bestie AI. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited for this.
Awesome. So, little background. One of the reasons that we got in touch was we had a client at Delegate that was using Bestie AI, and we wanted to utilize this tool for another property manager client of ours. And what I really admire about you is you are shaking up this industry and automating some of the old processes that have traditionally been done in the guest communication area of property management. But before we get into that, I would love to hear about your background. You said earlier that grew up and you went through the hospitality space before you founded Bestie AI. Talk me a little bit about your
Yeah, for sure. So
roots.
I originally grew up in Calgary in Canada, which is, they have an NHL team. It's not a small town by any means, about 1 million people, but it's not New York City. Obviously a big difference between where I live now and growing up. I started working at a restaurant when I was 14 years old, as an expediter, bussing tables, washing dishes, just everything, and instantly fell in love with restaurants. I put myself through university with the money I'd made from when I was 14 to 18. I started small businesses throughout high school and while in college, like cleaning barbecues, a handful of other small things. I used to do really big events. We once, shipped 500 people out to a farm an hour outside of our college for this like barn bash, and did that every year and built that into, we did over $50,000 in ticket sales one year for St. Patrick's Day. I actually almost did it during COVID and had to make the call. It was March of 2020 where I had to make the call 2 days before to cancel the whole thing. We had like 30,000 in ticket sales. So I've always loved, restaurants, events. I was a GM of a 1,500 person nightclub when I was 21 years old through college. So I was going to school Monday to Friday till 4 or 5 p.m. And then Thursday to Sunday, I was counting cash and doing inventory till like 5, 6 in the morning, sort of really burning the midnight oil. And by third or fourth year, I decided, all my friends are still going out. I might as well go out as well, but at least be getting paid for it. So that's sort of my background, was pure hospitality. And then coming out of college, I was like, I'm not going to be a nightclub manager my whole life. So I moved to Montreal and got into software. And I was the first hire at a company called Planned.com, which is basically an enterprise corporate event planning software, which was amazing because it was like tech mixed with events. And that's where I fell in love with it. COVID happened. And then I decided this sort of added a couple more years. My goal was to always be like a software founder at that point. But I said, I can't stick around. This just added too many years, COVID, being an event planning business, right? So then I decided to venture out, and that's when I met my co-founder. And then we actually started a different software company and then pivoted into Bestie, but that's a whole other story. Just a bit about my background.
That's awesome. You went from like barn party promotions to nightclub promotions to software engineer to now in the short-term rental space. How do you make that shift? Because like for me, for example, I started in a similar manner in the sense that I wasn't in the short-term rental space throughout college, but I basically stumbled upon the short-term rental space in my last year of college, and then I used that background to start Delegate. In your case, how did you make that transition from the first startup to now Bestie AI without that, I guess, short-term rental background?
Yeah, it was sort of, the stars sort of aligned. I had moved to New York in 2022, finally to get a visa. And we were working on basically an AI software for e-commerce brands, mainly sold to Shopify stores doing more than $1 million in revenue. And we had a system that would basically A/B test product photos, not too different from people A/B testing Airbnb photos, to be honest. And then we had an AI system that would generate new photos and test those to maximize conversion rate. So that was our product. We worked on that for about 2 years, and we just never had product market fit. And I think we had a few like bad bounces in a row and kind of came to the realization, especially with limited runway, like what are we doing here? Like obviously it's expected that a lot of seed stage companies fail. We raised about 1.5 million for that company, and we were sort of running out of money. But a year before that, I was talking to my brothers, and we were finding ways to like sort of keep in touch. There was this property that came up for sale right by where we grew up, be perfect for short-term rentals. And so we just bought that together. It was sort of cowboy. We bought it, financed the down payment, but we were so confident in sort of the cash flow. And we got a good fixed rate, so it all worked out. But then we bought a second property in that same condo, put it on Airbnb. And then that's where I got my foray into short-term rentals. So the intersection of the two is that our business was failing. I had this property management experience. I started managing properties for other people. And then we decided, what else could we build here in our last sort of 3-4 months? And so that decision was July 27th of 2023 that we decided to pivot. So just over a year ago, we just had our 1-year Bestie anniversary.
It's interesting. I see this, and I'm sure you would agree with this, with a lot of startups where established operators, oftentimes they have a fixed mindset about things because they were taught, like, let's say you started out as a property manager for another company and then you wanted to build something. You have a fixed mindset. You don't think as much out of the box because you're confined by the systems that you already have in place. And in your situation, you were rather new to the short-term rental space, but you had an open mind about what's possible and what's inefficient, which allowed you to say, wait, 24/7 guest communication, like that's something that can be automated now with this emerging technology, which is AI. I've seen that time and time again with startups, and it's interesting that it seems like that was the case for your experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important. I'm just an eternal student of this every single day, is that I think as founders, even just and as operators, like every day you have to sort of reset your prior because so much new information is coming in. And I think that the reality didn't change, that our business was failing. That didn't change day over day. What we decided to do purposely and explicitly is say, okay, let's like have some agency over this and let's make a decision and be decisive. And let's pivot and let's just try, because for sure this is going to have a better chance at what we know for sure isn't working right now. And then we just gave everything we had. And all you really need, everybody always says this, being a founder is just like constant delayed gratification, like working for stuff that's just not going to pay off for so long. And all we really need is one little nugget to keep us going. So for me, that was, we had built our first version within about a month, and I was just looking at old Slack messages, and we got our first message sent with AI in August of last year. And it was just like, that was just enough to get me going. And then in September, October, I went to Verma for the first time. And that was like being a kid in a candy shop, seeing all of the vendors. I saw you there before we had even met. I saw like you had the crazy promotions going. And it was just like, I walked into that exhibition area and I was like, this is so where we need to be. Like we were a minnow in this huge new unknown space. Not a single PMS knew who we were. Not a single person knew who I was. Yeah. Still probably a lot of people don't, but we were just so fresh. Yeah. And at that point I was like, oh, it's game over. We got to roll.
How much of the success that you've had thus far is first to market advantage? The reality is there's a lot of people trying to get into this space. A lot of other companies. How instrumental is like that first mover advantage when it comes to picking up that momentum?
Yeah, I mean, we were, I think now, if you look at us, we're one of the first, but by the time we decided to pivot into building Bestie, there was already 2 vendors that had been around and that were live on these PMSs months before us. And so there was a sense of immediacy. We're like, oh my God, they are just like probably cleaning up right now. I have no problem in admitting like we demoed those products on my properties to see what the standard was. And our prior going into it is obviously somebody's already killing it in this well enough that it's probably not worth us to explore. Like that was our first guess. And then when we saw the products, we're like, no, we can definitely build at least as good of a version of this and then just be really good at go to market. We've been working with the sense of urgency as like we missed the boat. And the reality is we missed it by about a year, but turns out you can still be not first and you can still compete rigorously. And we're number one. We've done that through just constant compounding, grind, and relentless work ethic. But we're number one right now.
That's awesome.
Just across the board as far as number of properties, number of large operators, number of PMSs. And so that doesn't mean we're going to stay that way, but that's where we are now.
Yeah, it's good now that you have funding. You're growing your team. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that, like going from a team of 3 people to now you just added 7 additional people. Talk me through, as a startup founder, how you go through that decision making where you see product market fit, you have a customer base, and now you're like, okay, we got to put some gas in the tank to get this to the next level.
Yeah, I think the problem for me was that when you look at, for me, it's sort of revenue per employee, and that includes like revenue per founder. And when we were basically like hanging on, bootstrapped from the last of our money, plus a Stripe loan that we took out at like a fat interest rate, when we had landed the 1.5 million, I mean, we had plans and we were doing enough revenue, but just by the facts, we only had like $600 in our bank account when we got the wire. If our investors were listening to this, we would have been fine. Like we had a ton of revenue, like it was going to be fine, but it was tight. And they all knew that. Like we had gone out to raise basically in April and didn't close till end of July, mid-July. Actually, the craziest thing is the money wired down to the day that we decided to pivot to Bestie, which I put on my calendar back in 2023 was like the day we decided to pivot. It was the same day, which is insane. But I think the thing that I struggled with was that like we've gotten to this really impressive milestone as far as traction with just a few of us. But then when you tack on 5 or 6 or 7 people, you know, your traction doesn't double overnight. It becomes a lot less impressive, a lot more people doing what's effectively the same thing. Yeah. However, that's sort of the pessimistic look at it, because what we're really doing is preparing for the next sort of 10x. So this is the least efficient we'll ever be. So for example, hiring a customer success manager, we have a phenomenal customer success manager who just owns that domain. You know, account management. So like after people sign up above a certain amount of listings, they have a dedicated person that they have a relationship with. That isn't just me. Like up until our first 300 customers, that's just been me. You know, we have a head of sales who's got years of experience on the outbound. You can't take a short-sighted approach, basically. It's like, this is the least efficient we'll ever be, but we're prepared to take on the next sort of 10 to 20x.
Yeah. How has your day, your week, month changed since bringing on these people? Because now you're in delegation mode, right? You're building a team. As a founder, how has that delegation changed your day and the trajectory of your business?
I think it's best summarized as like similar to really impressive marathon runners. To do some of your best training, you have to go slow to go fast. If you want to run a sub-3 marathon, which I wanted to do, which I was training for before I got injured, was you have to do so many miles at such a low pace in order to build the foundation to go fast. You have to go from being like, we're only going to survive the next month, to saying, okay, we have that foundation. How do we win over the next 2 years? And so bringing people on, I was the bottleneck in so many cases. As the founder, you're like, it's faster if I were to do it myself, but then you're just in this circular problem that never ends. So I think we just said, let's go slow. Like August was so focused on getting everybody in position, just forgetting about metrics for the month, just getting everybody. We had a whole product to bring people up to speed on. We didn't even have a CRM until we had our first like hire, because I was the CRM, you know, so it's starting to really pay off. So everybody's ramped up sort of in their second and third month. And it's starting to really start to pay off.
In the recruiting process, I'm curious, like, did you look for, I mean, you obviously, this is a nuanced thing, but there are people that take the position that you look for someone that's been there, done that, versus someone that they have like the soft skills to do the job. Let's talk like non-technical roles within the company.
I think every position from the like go-to-market side is, there's certain things where having industry experience doesn't matter at all. Like if you're an accountant, you can be an accountant anywhere. And it's more about like the soft skills about organization, let's say for customer success. Whereas on the sales front, oh my goodness, the difference between someone who comes in and knows what a PMS is, point solutions, like the lay of the land, which granted doesn't take a long time to figure out because like it is all very well organized and market maps of each software. But it is really nice to have sort of experience selling to PMs. Like ultimately that's really valuable. So far though, like our philosophy has just been heavily based on personality and what they look to get out of the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Realistically, when I hire people, I'm like, I hope you go off and do amazing things, but ultimately I want to work with you for this whole thing. I don't want you to come here for a year and go to some other job. Like this is everything for us. So it's been very like personality driven, and the rest you can teach. The rest is just sort of semantics. And then I think that's for the first sort of 10, 15 hires. And then over time, you might want to bring in sort of seasoned professionals in this class of, you know, short-term rentals or within sales or whatever. But for now, it's been a big part of our DNA. Also because we're 100% in person, which is a huge sort of caveat in 2024. But it just by design is a litmus test to get the right people, people that want to come in.
So everyone is New York City based?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And expensive, I'm sure.
Yeah, and expensive. Yeah, that's sort of that trade-off where you're basically paying a 20 to 30% premium in office space and stuff, but I think you're getting at minimum 2 to 3x the output.
Why is that?
I think like just the amount of time it takes to pull someone over to your screen and walk through something and huddle and do it together in person versus everything being written out or a Zoom call or a Notion doc or something like that. That alone is a big driver. And then I think just from like the leadership perspective, I think for me, I think I make the most impact, not even just motivating people, but just like getting people amped up. You saw Travis Kalanick at the All In Summit. I mean, his whole thing was like getting people amped up. Like every day, the question is, what are we all doing to move the business forward? And doing it all in remote sort of takes the fun out of it. If you were to just optimize for happiness and nothing else really mattered. And I find that even like Brian Chesky, he said the loneliest day of his life was the day they went public at $100 billion valuation. That was the loneliest day of his life. So if your life is all outcome oriented, that's just not a way to do it. So if we're optimizing for happiness, for me, that means coming to the office every day and being around the people that I want to work with.
Gotcha. Now, from the get-go, this was a prerequisite that when you were hiring, you're like, listen, we are in the office. We are not remote.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, it's becoming more and more standardized for employers to offer fully remote positions. Did you see a decrease in the number of applicants for these positions because of that? Did it affect it in any way?
Yeah, I think you could make the argument about, especially in sort of niche categories like short-term rentals, that the likelihood of somebody having all that experience in the space and living in New York or being willing to move to New York is like the expected outcome of that is probably pretty low. But like I said, if your sort of core foundation is hiring on personality fit and for the mission, the rest can be taught. There's actually a completely asymmetric amount of talent, greater probably than it's ever been. When you live in one of these mega cities, you just have unlimited access. You could just point to what you want. Like we're experiencing this with like, let's say international salespeople, where we don't have to say, oh, it's a plus if you have these 3 languages. We can make that a prerequisite and still get 1,000 applicants.
Yeah.
So I think that it's definitely possible. You don't know what you don't know. So maybe we lost out on some really great people. But I think at the same time, the people we want to hire, like one of our account managers moved here for this job, lives in New York for this job. How great is your sales skills as a founder to pitch them on the vision that they would drop everything and move to the city? And it's not a bad city to live in. I mean, you've been here a while. There's worse places to be.
I mean, that in and of itself, it's a great sales proposition, just having people come to New York. I have a good friend of mine. He works as a sales executive at another startup. And he moved from Florida to New York, partly because he wanted a new adventure. He wanted to experience a new city. So in that sense, that goes into the calculus of someone moving to the city and taking a job it's a startup and it's a risky play for anyone.
Yeah, I think that what I learned, and we also have sort of a chip on our shoulder because Arlo and I, my co-founder, before I got a visa, we worked our first pretty much 2 years remote. And that was just grueling to like work with a co-founder remotely for that long. So that was a huge contributing factor and just also our personalities. But what I learned through doing that is that it's honestly human nature to take the path of least resistance. And if the general populace of the workforce has been given the option to effectively roll out of bed and hit a Zoom camera off daily, it's going to slowly change your whole sort of personality to an extent. Sure, it's easier and you can justify it by saving time and commuting and things like that. But then the days turn to months and months turn to years. And then you're like, I have lacked sort of the human interaction. If given the option to take the path of least resistance, even us ambitious people will take it. And it's almost not in our own good. It's just, so I think, for example, one of our recent hires, she had been working 2 years remote, 2.5 years remote. And she was just like, yeah, I just need to be in person. Like, and
Really?
she voiced that to me, and I was like, okay, you get it, because that's the way I feel.
Yeah.
And so she's like, I need an opportunity where I can come in and be engaged. And that's not necessarily always going to be the case. But when you're trying to go from like 1 million to 10 million in revenue in like a 15-month period, which is sort of our benchmark, you just can't have people sitting on the sidelines working remote. Eventually it could move into that, but just not today.
Well, it seems to be working. Up until this point, has it been just word of mouth? Is it cold calling? What has your approach been to getting Bestie AI out there in the space and actually getting customers to sign up with Bestie AI?
Reflecting on a similar business model with our previous startup where we were an app on these like Shopify marketplace, and WooCommerce and Commerce Cloud. We got zero liquidity through that marketplace because it was just flooded with 8,000 or 9,000 partners. So we could never rely on inbound, but it is pretty next level, the sort of inbound you get through being a PMS partner, I think, especially in sort of a splashy new category. So the coolest thing about our business is that a lot of it is just hand-holding for inbound customers who discover us on those marketplaces and then give us a shot. I mean, our whole app is completely self-serve. So it doesn't require any sort of human intervention to get started, but we definitely want to have that approach to build a relationship. And ultimately, we want to become sort of the default for this new segment. And you do a lot of that. We don't look at just like listing count. Like we'll spend an hour with somebody who has 3 or 4 listings because maybe they're in a Facebook group with somebody who has 100 and they had just such a great experience. And it's also a lot less transactional. If you apply that sort of human hospitality approach at a scale where you're talking to hundreds of people, that's just going to compound, and you don't have to be sort of penny wise, pound foolish with only spending your time on the ICP. So a big part of our success has just been being live on the PMS marketplace and then combining that with a pretty relentless outbound strategy, which is just sort of plain and simple, smile and dial.
Yeah. In the conversations I've had with other providers, one of the key challenges is integrations. How have you guys tackled the obstacle of being integrated with as many of these PMSs as possible? Or has it been like, we're going to focus in on the big ones, and then as we have more exposure, we'll go after, the smaller fish?
Yeah, it's funny because like there's nothing a customer cares less about than hearing that we want to add more PMSs, because all that says to the customer is that these people care more about distribution than they do their product. So it's treading the line between distribution and being in this sort of rat race of a new category where there's constantly expectation of like new features and cool automations. I think that we've identified sort of the key partners that we want to work with. I think we're probably the fastest at integrating with them. We can get an integration live within like 4 to 6 weeks of like signing the paperwork, which just sort of benchmarking against some of our competitors, it looks like it takes them a lot longer. And considering we've been around a fraction of the time. And so we actually have a lot of like the AI do the programming for these integrations, which is pretty cool, like have it write a lot of the code. And we built sort of our own kind of unified API that we use. And so there's some kind of tips and tricks to doing it. For example, like we're the only AI messaging vendor on uplisting as of now, because there isn't really a way of sending and receiving messages through their API. Like we found a workaround that's like pretty like clever.
Yeah.
That's hard to replicate. So I think like getting to the PMSs that based off of customer pull, like people reaching out, and then there's a handful of ones on our roadmap. But I think it's a really important point about you can't just be blind to the customer requests and say, no, we're just doing distribution because, but at the same time, it's a lot of like startup costs just to get everything live. And then you do marketing and you do like podcasts, you go to conferences, and then the conversation ends because you don't have the integration done. So it's kind of annoying that, you got to, tread the line.
But I think where your momentum comes from, what was your first integration partner? Was it Bestie?
It was Hostaway. We went live with Hostaway in October. And then on December 28th, we went live with Bestie right before New Year's, which was like probably not the best time for like getting splashy press around it. But those were the first two. And then it was quite a few months before we added anything else. But we added Uplisting, Logify, Hostfully, and OwnerRes.
That's awesome. One component of your software that really caught my eye from the beginning as a user, there are different softwares that position themselves from value add from a time perspective and then value add from a monetary perspective. And what I loved about Bestie AI from the get-go is you can quantify the impact of it in terms of dollars, not just dollars saved, but dollars made. Can you speak a little bit about like the upsell features that you guys have and how that has had an effect on the growth of the product?
The interesting point about our product is that the user is quite different than the decision maker. So of course, and you've experienced this, like we're the secret weapon for rolling out on an operator with 1,000 units, and 40 of them download the Chrome extension, which augments their inbox and generates responses and summaries and tasks and all that cool stuff we do. But ultimately, of course, they're going to put their thumb up and say, yeah, we want this product. But then the decision makers looking at it is like, well, you guys are already a cost center. This thing is helping you do, the cynical view is that it's making you do your job easier, which, well, I still have to pay you. In the optimistic view, it's, oh, you can free up your time to do other value generating things. But I see both of those. So what we learned is it's just not enough until the AI is good enough to actually reduce OpEx, like on overnight things, like number of staff on. I think right now we can go from, if you had 6 agents on at 24/7 for larger operators, you could probably cut down to 2. But that's only in the like extreme case of scale. So it was really important from day one to also say, what else can we sort of bolt on from my experience as an operator that are quick wins, that a decision maker can take the whole time savings and AI cool stuff, but then also just be cold and objective about it. Is like, is this adding to our bottom line? And funny enough, you can build all these cool features around AI and enhance productivity and things, but some of the most simple tools we built for revenue and upsells are the most popular, I think, just because the calculus of the decision maker.
It's funny that you've taken the approach on the software side. So when I first started Delegate, we provided customer experience specialists to these short-term rentals. And I had to go through that same value proposition with my customers where I would say, listen, one, you're getting that 24/7 hospitality. But on top of that, these are people that are trained in upselling, late checkouts, early check-ins, being responsible for processing damage claims, that sort of thing. So that was like 2020 approach with human beings, and you've taken that and applied that in a really streamlined software setting. It's funny how it's moved from the human beings to now AI. And with that, I would love to kind of transition to, you touched upon like the need for less humans in the loop. Where do you see the technology going within the next few years in terms of continuing that trend of needing less and less human beings?
Yeah, no, I think that there's been a lot of arguments, especially recently, some talks at that All In Summit around like, there's kind of one winner here so far, and it's NVIDIA. They are basically the sellers of intelligence at this point. Everybody's sort of benefiting either directly or indirectly from that. And I think the best way to look at us when we kind of ratchet down into a niche like the one we're in is that if you look at sort of Moore's law, there's that famous NVIDIA graph of their hoppers and like their new chips, and it shows Moore's law that just gets, decimated by the compute power that's, I think, 1,000x since 2016. Even if the applied AI softwares like down to our niche are even close to either Moore's law or that trajectory of like intelligence being generated by computers, then it's just going to be a net positive for everybody. And then you compound that against the fact that you have multiple vendors all gunning for the same sort of segment to be the winner in this opportunity for applied AI automation within short-term rentals. You pair those two things together, it's just going to be a game changer for operators, and it's going to never have been a better time to start one of these businesses or buy one of these businesses. Like a lot of our customers are acquiring property management contracts, paying big premiums for them. I think Sonder and Vacasa and some of those other players, they had all the right pieces, but they were like 5 years too early because their whole was built on OpEx that was just so human. Whereas if they just come out, so, the people who are scaling right now there's so much room to run for efficiency that, like you said, it's all the things that you do that are manual that AI can help you with. And then it's actually, more importantly, all the things you just don't do because the expected values are too low or it'd be way too time consuming. And so I think that the whole industry is going to benefit immensely, I think bigger than anything they've ever seen before, just at the rate that things are improving and how much we have to duke it out to win the hearts and minds of these property managers, because ultimately they're going to have so much choice, like they do PMSs, like they do price apps, like they do anything.
Do you think that a big constraint right now of the growth is not just communication, but coordination? So like I see this right now with our company, we're utilizing tools like Bestie AI to really lessen the amount of time it takes for responses and automate responses. So it lessens the number of agents required, which has been, a net benefit for our business because we can reduce costs for our clients. But one constraint I see is that these tools need to be able to coordinate with different human parties, because at the end of the day, it's a hospitality business. There's a lot of moving parts on the ground. Where do you see the AI dealing more with the coordination aspect of the business versus strictly communication?
Yeah, so there's this sort of two big buzzwords in the whole applied AI scene, which is one is called LangChain, and basically this idea of function calling, which is where the best way of looking at it is I think people take if you say make me a bolognese, as a chef, then you kind of break out as the chef and intuitively know the 5 or 6 steps to get there. But you have to use a bunch of inference to know what those steps are, because the only objective was make me a bolognese. But in order to do that, you need to know that you have to go to a store to pick up these groceries, and then you have to boil the water, and you have to do all these things. It's the exact same thing with somebody says the toilet isn't working, or there's missing towels, or the place is dirty. It's exactly how this AI is built to not just respond with one outcome, but understand all the steps that it needs to actually give the right outcome. Because to that, an AI that's sort of simplistic would say, oh, great, I'll get that for you and drop it off right away. But it's completely disconnected from reality because it didn't send a task to the operations person. It didn't, reason and find out that it's 10 p.m. and there's nobody available. It didn't do all of those steps. So what's going to happen is, for now, before we even get to this sort of function calling scene where it's exactly like you described, basically an AI dispatcher that's capable of doing the 2 or 3 steps that an agent does in order to accomplish the outcome. It's actually first going to be, we're not even quite there yet. I think just having a full wrap around the API will handle a lot of things that don't require human intervention, but historically have required somebody to go in and look at stuff. For example, somebody saying, do you have any other properties available in the area for these dates?
Yeah.
A lot of these AI systems don't even look at availabilities of other properties yet. Or if somebody says, is there an early check-in available? You have to abide by some rules that the early check-in is only available if there's nobody, checking out that day, or if that person is checking out, the place has to be clean. So there's a lot of things that require human intervention, which don't require any physical intervention, which is the first thing that the AI has to do. And then once it's done that, then it can move to the whole sort of sexy, you import who does what, and you have the AI sort of dispatch stuff for you. So it will all get there, but there's still a lot that has to be done before we could even get there. And I think ultimately that's best done as an iterative solution, because people have to learn to trust this thing over time as it does more. So we wouldn't, even if I told you that was available today, would you trust it versus using it for another year and seeing it build sort of with you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to that point, I'm sure that coordination process requires a human in the loop to actually train the AI on processes that you have in place. Going off of the example of late checkouts or early check-ins, our staff, oftentimes they have to coordinate with previous guests, and they're like, hey, are you checking, what time are you planning on checking out? If a guest is checking out at 7 a.m., then that's a coordination play to be able to upsell, an early check-in. You still have to train the AI to discern that, or to be able to communicate with previous guests to say, hey, at this company A, our procedure is we do ask when a guest is planning on checking out. If they're planning on checking out at 7 a.m., there has to be a coordination play with housekeeping, with the next guest coming in, then charging the late checkout. Yeah. And every property management company is different in their processes. And I'd be interested to know what that process would look like as we move forward in training the AI on your specific procedures.
The first step is just have the AI, somebody says we're out. If somebody says our flight lands at 7, if somebody says things that mean it, just update the check-in and check-out times for that, because the industry standard right now that we all lean on is 11 to 4 is the sellable window, which is often rarely sellable because by the time you get the cleaner in there, it's just a wash. When in reality, the semantic window based off of each variable could be, the guy says he's out at 7 a.m. He just says, I'm out, thanks. The AI obviously can detect that that means they've checked out. Now the window goes from 7 a.m., but then it reads the other conversation that says, oh, our flight lands at 8 p.m. So you don't need to ask them what time they're checking in. The AI already knows that they're not going to get in even at 8. The AI would be smart enough to know they get in at 9 because it's 30 minutes away from the airport and they have to do customs because there's an international flight. So now you actually have a 14-hour time window. You know what I mean? So like why this is your lowest priority cleaning schedule versus moving that person into another unit. Like all those things that I'm describing, like that's not a job for a human to do. That's no fun. That's like a bunch of statistics. It's like another question is, do I sell this late checkout on a Sunday night when I can see it's available for booking, but my historic booking rate of these Sundays is about 60% occupancy for $80? Or would I take a 90% likelihood of selling this late checkout of that, what's the expected value, 90% likelihood of getting $60 or a 30% likelihood of getting $80? You'd actually take the late checkout. So that's just a statistical problem. So like all of these things is when we talk about, if you really get in the weeds, that alone, just flipping the entire early check-in, late checkout thing for a soup to nuts automation that run by AI and statistic models, that alone could be massive for these operators at 2 or 3 listings or at like 2,000 or 3,000.
On top of that, just not just from a revenue booster, but from a cost savings, you're talking in the millions of dollars spent on housekeeping costs across the United States because operators believe they have a smaller window for cleaning than they really do. So
Exactly.
They're like, oh, we need 3 people on this. Well, you didn't need 3 people. You only needed 1 person for this cleaning because the person already checked out 3 hours ago. So that's another area, definitely from a cost savings perspective.
Yeah, it's sort of like the traveling salesman problem. I think it's like one of these sort of famous old stories of after, the salesman has to go to these 17 locations, but it's completely after you're trying to optimize the route. But the reality is it's completely impossible to find the best route after a certain amount of stops. And it's the exact same thing with cleaners, is that most people defer to throwing money at the problem. The thought of trying to optimize it all is just not worth it, and they have bigger fish to fry. So perfect. Just a perfect example of my original point, which is all the things you don't do that you could be doing, but the expected value is just too low. Like that's where it's going to really shine, because up until now, you've made it this far by doing everything manually, so something's working. Yeah. Like we didn't have to exist in order for people to be successful. So what are we really going to bring to the table that's going to really change it for you? And the expectation is also not 20 or 30%. The expectation is 10x because tech spend is going up, inflation is high, occupancies are down, expectations are higher. You know what I mean? Where
do you think the humans in 3 years from now? I was just recently at an AI conference in Vegas, and there was a panel discussing the future of AI, job displacement, automation. And so they had a bunch of speakers there that were talking about where we're headed. In your thinking, in terms of the pessimistic view, in terms of job displacement, what's your thinking, for customer service agents, people that work in the guest experience space versus like your optimistic view of where are these people being retooled and offering more value that AI cannot?
I mean, I think that if you look at sort of hardware and software, so like bits and atoms, there's a massive issue in the US with job openings. Like I think it's one of the highest it's ever been. And the labor market, sort of low to mid-skilled work, has never been higher. And so that, just in a purely capitalistic sense, is the biggest opportunity for jobs that need to be filled. So that's naturally where a lot of the R&D is going. These autonomous robots aren't being trained to do, fix cars. They're being trained to work on a production line because there's so many openings. They're being trained to work in a restaurant, an assembly line. McDonald's is the same thing as an industry assembly line. So I think that, and you heard like Travis Kalanick talk about, cloud kitchens and, like once again, focusing on hospitality with the human element and stuff. So I do think that the economy would prosper a lot more just as far as GDP to be able to make all of these businesses thrive more and have reliable, lower costs, which is going to ultimately come back to the economy via Social Security and tax revenue, which is going to benefit the lower class. There's been some like debates around UBI, and there was that recent study that basically said it was moot, but I think there's a lot of net positives that are going to come out before we start seeing any real job displacement. I actually think that, I don't think that I mean, there's already been low cost labor available to us, say in the Western world for 20 years. All of China's economy was built off of that. Same thing with India, same thing emerging with Africa. So I think that it's always existed alternatives, cheaper alternatives to offshore work we do, and it hasn't hurt us. So I just think that it's going to be a net positive for all of society. It's going to allow people to have access to information they never had before. It's going to bring a whole generation out of, I think, a lot of poverty, because they'll have access to effectively the best possible tutors and mentors and professors at their fingertips for less than it costs to run electricity.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
I made the point that it will increase human agency for individuals. I had an operations person that knows how to make really beautiful pottery pieces. And that's she's a craftswoman by trade, works in the short-term rental space, but that's her passion. And now with the use of OpenAI and ChatGPT, she can actually build out business plan and ask ChatGPT as if it was a consultant, a McKinsey consultant. How do I take this and how do I make a living from it? That's my optimistic view, is that for those people that have focused their attention on low-skilled labor, they can now have the human agency to do what they're very much passionate about. And everybody is going to be their own little mini entrepreneur, be able to offer something to the marketplace, leveraging the AI that's in their hands.
Yeah, it's like if you look at this sort of 6 to 8 or whatever the millions of job openings there are, is that if all of those get filled, then all of the people that were one layer up are also going to use the same software to get smarter and do higher skill things.
Yeah.
So if you take your sort of average baseline person right now, they're also benefiting from the same software to learn things, to become higher skilled, to train themselves in a way that was never available to them before. And so they're going to level up. So if we were in an economy where there was no job openings and it was 100% efficient, then the entire bottom 10 or 20% will get completely wiped. But we have this massive capacity at the very bottom that if that gets all filled, everybody's going to level up.
Yeah.
I don't think that's even naive or overly optimistic. I think it's most likely the first outcome. And then maybe this evolves. But every revolution, industrial revolutions, all of the things have ultimately resulted in more prosperity for humans. So I don't think this is going to be any different.
The people that managed the horse carriages, they became the mechanics for the Ford.
Exactly.
So I have the same mentality, and I see it. We're in the customer service space. We're seeing our business is transitioning from that space to leveling up our agents to be more creative managers, because we see that that's the next skill set. And we see it also in the call center space. There's a lot of AI companies out there that are completely automating the call center. And what they've seen is there's different tiers of customer support roles, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They're seeing tier 1 roles going away, being automated by AI, and the people that have upskilled that can deal with more nuanced situations, that they're product managers, those are the people that are thriving, because you still need creative forces that can utilize the AI to the benefit of the company.
Yeah.
In that sense, I think that's where people are going. It's going to force people to be more competitive. It's going to force people to upskill, but in the end, it's going to be a net benefit to the economy and the world.
Yeah, completely agree. Totally agree.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, great conversation. For those that are interested in learning more about Bestie AI, where can people find you online and connect with you personally?
Yeah, so my name is Sam Dundas. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can check out our website, getbestie.ai. And we'll be at all the major conferences over the next few months. We'll be sponsoring Hostchella in November and doing a Guesty Roadshow, and we'll be at DARM. We'll be at the Expo VR conference. We're sort of going nuts on the exposure, the IRL exposure, in the spirit of being in person. So I'll be at all of those places, and you'll see us with the sort of, tacky heart hands emoji. That's us. It's a lot easier to remember than just sort of a generic chatbot, logo. So we went that direction. So you come up and say hi, or to anybody from our team. We'd love to hear from you, and obviously we'd be happy to show you a demo. We do a free trial, so you can turn it on and test it yourself. And if it's a fit, we'd love to work with you. So if you're listening to this and you're curious about what AI can do, we're a good place to start.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Sam. Appreciate you. and I'll see you at the VRMA.
Awesome. I can't wait, man.
All
Thanks
right.
again.
Have a good
Bye.
one.